So Shabbat Shalom. We are in the midst of Parshat Vaetchanan, which has to do with moving through with grace through the world, and it is the second portion of the book of Deuteronomy, and actually has the telling of Moses saying to the children and grandchildren who stood at Mount Sinai, this is what your ancestors experienced, this is what your grandparents and grandparents experienced when they stood at Mount Sinai, and here are the 10 Commandments. And then shortly after the 10 Commandments, we find this text. Do you all recognize it? Yes. You've seen this one before. Did you know it came from Torah? Raise your hand if you knew that this came from the Torah. So some of you did, some of you didn't, right? So this is actually from Deuteronomy chapter 6. There are actually citations in Mishkan Tefillah, which weren't in Gates of Prayer or the Union Prayer Book. In those places, it was called the Watchword of Our Faith. And I'm curious, somebody who remembers the way old days, how did you, what body position were you in when you said the Shema? You were standing up, but then immediately after, what happened? You then sat down before Vahavta, right? And so it's quite interesting in part because I'm going to give you a little bit of secret here. It's not actually so secret. You see the first line, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. That's in Torah. And then the next line in Torah is this one, Va'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. It goes immediately, they are the same text. One is Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, and then this is verse 5. And so that's part of the reason it was fascinating to have the discussion with the reformers of Germany and then of the United States, why they separated the two texts. They wanted to give real primacy to these words of Shema, but in doing so kind of broke apart this incredible piece of Torah. Now you might notice that there's another line there that isn't in Torah. And so then we have a question of what is it? That line of Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. Now that line, again, not in Torah, and it was a response that goes all the way back to the times of the ancient temple in Jerusalem. And what would happen is that the high priest of ancient Israel on Yom Kippur would go into the Holy of Holies, and he would pull back the curtain into the Mamash, Holy of the Holies, and then he would come out and he would be all sparkly and stuff, and he would say to the community, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. I've gone into the ark, I've seen the ark, I've gone into the Holy of Holies, I've come out, and I can tell you for a fact, people of Israel, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Listen, Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. I've seen it. And the people would respond, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. They would respond, blessed is God's glorious name. We've now said the name forever and ever. And so that's kind of where the beginnings of this were, and there were some little word changes that happened along the way. What I love about these two lines in relationship is that you don't, it's Judaism. So if you have two Jews, how many opinions do you get? How many? 6. On the other hand. And so it's very interesting to see that there are lots of different responses about Baruch Shem Kavod, where it came from and why it's said. What I call your attention to tonight is how we say it. Has anyone noticed something special about the way that we say Baruch Shem Kavod? You whisper it. Do you know why we whisper it? On the high holidays, we don't, which is really quite incredible and quite important, that sometimes we whisper and sometimes we don't. It's interesting because this week we had Tisha B'Av, and on Tisha B'Av morning you don't wear tefillin and tzitzit, and yet by Tisha B'Av afternoon you don a talit, which you never do in the afternoon. We actually do things differently so we feel that change of texture and time. Do you know why we whisper it, though, Jerry? You do. If you hadn't already gotten a pomegranate pucker for the anniversary, you would have gotten another one. So you want to give primacy to the Shema. This is in the Torah. This isn't in the Torah. These are two different things. Listen and hear the difference. There's another one, another commentary that says that the angels are the ones who really call out in prayer, and as a way of showing that we are mortal, that we are finite, as a way of showing humility, we whisper, we say lower these words of Baruch Shem Kavod. There's another one that I find so fascinating. What does the word Shema mean? Listen. Hear or listen. And how do we say Shema? We say it really boldly and loudly. You really listen to all of the voices calling out with Shema with all the Ruach and Koach. And the next line, what do? We soften our voices. We actually have to really listen to each other as we are saying these words of praise. As I looked at this, I hope as I'm offering to you that power of changing our voice, of changing how we say and what we say. Some of you were with me for a coffee and kibbutz a few months ago, when we actually talked about the power of whispering. Does anyone remember that one? I'm trying to think of who was there. Diane was there for it. I think Sheldon was there. I think the Friedmans were there. They're on Zoom, don't worry, so they're listening. And it was this beautiful essay by John Green that we've been talking about through Coffee and Kibbutz. And he said one of the things that happens is he gets really anxious about leaving. So he was with his daughter. She's a preschooler. Have any of you ever gotten a preschooler ready for preschool? Okay? So his preschooler tends to like to go at her own pace. Okay? His wife was away. He was in charge. So some of you know what it means to be the spouse who is suddenly left in charge. It's a lot of responsibility, right? You have to pack the lunch the right way. You got to get the shoes on the right feet. You have to get them in the car and know how to get them in the car, and you got to make sure they have breakfast. Have breakfast before you get in the car, right? There's a particular order you got to do because you got to follow the instructions, whether they're left on the washing machine or the refrigerator, and all of the reminders and all of this stuff. And he is sitting there spinning his wheels because he's watching the clock, and he's like, you know, I forget what his daughter's name is, but Rachel, we've got 5 minutes. Rachel, we've got 3. He is just going on, spinning and and she finally says, Dad, can I tell you a secret? And he just stops in that moment when she whispers to him and says, Dad, I have a secret. And he leaned in to listen to his daughter. And in the essay, he talks about that moment of that whispering to each other is also a kind of intimacy. Because you have to get close by someone that's whispering. And you have to stop making lots of noise and settle yourself and really concentrate to hear someone that's whispering. That's part of Baruch Shem Kavod. That is part of this offering of these words of Shema. It's a reminder that sometimes we have to really lift our voices loud to call out to God and call out to each other and use our voices coming together to create that harmony that is a unity that is more than the sum of its parts. And it's also a reminder that immediately after we do that, sometimes we have to drop our voice. We have to settle ourselves. We have to find that humility that we don't have to puff up and fill every space, every corner, with every piece of our being. Sometimes we have to just be quiet and still in silence to really listen to each other, to listen to our own spirit, to listen to the divine, to hear even the smallest sounds that remind us that there is important work to do to bring holiness into our world. Amen. Shabbat Shalom.